There we go. Okay, all that's true, but Cliff is Canadian, so he says Nassau instead of NASA. So we have to fix that. I started speaking at NASA. And let's go on here. Now, where I got the idea for this conversation is, I don't know if you're anything like me, I like the behind the scenes stuff. Like, how do you have your podcast environment set up? How's your office set up? So I was invited to keynote this big event in Los Angeles County in the mid to end of November. And, I had started gathering information, thinking about, well, gosh, what should I look at? I thought, you know what, maybe I'll bring you guys along and just kind of show you sort of where I started in bringing together information and deciding what I will talk about. This isn't the presentation, but you'll understand these are places I went and looked to get some data, because the title of that keynote, which is also free, is Autobiographicacy, the Story of Los Angeles County in Maps. Now, I wanted to start this with, because, we're going to go off on that GIS tangent, and Cliff did tell me that, there's different levels of people that like to come and listen. And once this hits YouTube, you'll have even more of a varied audience. And if you're like me, you've always heard about this first law of geography. And, from time to time, I stopped and I was like, there's got to be others if this is the first. What are the others? And I just never paid it any mind, because I'm an autodidact. I'm self-taught. A data scientist that just moved into geospatial. All those things that Cliff mentioned are true. That's more like my touchstones to get here. So I found the second one, and I thought, this is the one I'm hanging my hat on. The phenomenon external to an area of interest affects what goes on inside. And this is of extreme importance as we move through some of these slides, and I'll try to bring us back there as we talk. Now, I'm going to go to QGIS, allegedly. There we go. Because I wanted to show you like where I start. This isn't where I end up necessarily, but if there's a geographic area, especially a place like Los Angeles, where am I going to start? How am I going to find this? What's relevant? What's not? Where can I find information to even identify any stories that might be worth telling? So the first thing I do usually is I'll just go to a map, and this is OpenStreetMap inside of QGIS. There are ways to load your QGIS with tons. These are all my maps that I have available as base maps under my XYZ tiles. I've written about this in the book You're Going to Win. But there's a GitHub that steps you through how to get all these beautiful maps at your disposal. But you can just come in here and grab the little magnifying glass and pick an area of interest. Maybe I'll take something smaller. I did the whole county, but just so something, if I want to load something that happens in our lifetime, I'll kind of just zoom us in here. And I'm going to move my big head so I can get to the buttons. Now, if you're familiar with plugins, I'm going to assume, I'm going to move pretty quickly, but I'm going to assume that you know like where to find a menu item. So when you go to plugins up here, and you're going to look for, I already have this installed, but you're going to look for OSM. And here's the plugin for OSM, and you're going to install it. And this is just the first, this is what I do. It's the first step when I'm doing my, just like story exploration. And here, this is when it's loaded, you'll see this icon right here. This is the OSM, quick OSM icon. And we click it, and now we can look for things. You can look for, I have some shots of this later, but if you want to look for certain types of buildings, houses, loading dock, everything is here. You can look for, what else can we look for here? Well, land use might be under things, but like land use. So you have to spell it right for starters, but you can just find something. Suppose for some reason you want to find like commercial land use. So you would set the key up here. You can add other things too, but sometimes it takes such a long time to run that I keep it very specific. And then here I usually pick the canvas extent. So I'm not doing like the whole map that is visible, but just what I'm specifically looking at. You can do a layer extent. These are a little smaller places to run your, I'm not going to run any of this stuff because I don't think you're here waiting for stuff to run, but go down to the advanced. First thing I do is I get rid of this and I set it to the max. You don't need it often, but you don't want to be waiting for something and then have it time out. And if you know it's land use commercial and it's going to be returned to you as a multi-polygon, then, select it there. If you just want the point, then select it there. I'm going to show you a little later on GeoFabric, where you download everything in a big package and you're going to have to hit all that stuff, or just you'll see what I'm talking about when we get there. Just understand what your data is likely to look like and just streamline it. And if you notice right here, the default says save to temporary file. If you do that, you're going to get one of those little temp files over here. I'll show you one later when we get into the slide deck. And you'll have to save that if you want it to be permanent. Otherwise, it's just a project instance. But you can avoid that entirely by just picking save your file somewhere. Just create like a folder, QGIS in the wild, how'd that get there? And just fold, just save whatever files you generate here there. And so this will load up onto the map. And I mean, I can give it a go. I think it's probably going to time out. Let me show you that in the stills and just kind of walk you around through here just a little bit so that you understand you have panels that you can set here. I won't spend too much time in case you guys know this already, but if you just go to the panels, this is quick and dirty. This is how I set up my console. There's things that I want. I want my browser because then anything I download, I can just pull right onto the layer map. I like pulling things in here. My layer styling, the easiest trick you can ever get with layer styling is the ability to just look at your categories, set the colors up, and now you have a nice legend that you can use on your map. The processing toolbox is where you have all your links to things, like if you use grass or white box tools or whatever tools you have access to, you can pull them in here. Python, I do a lot of Python in the QGIS environment. So it's very easy. In the results viewer, is usually where I hear the wah, why something didn't work. But, I don't take it personally because that's, you learn from those problems that you have. So what I'm going to do now is go back to the deck and I'm going to show you some of those things. I just wanted to show you how easy it is just to grab. Keep moving my head around so I can get to the how easy it is to just grab what you need. So that was the plugin. And just like if you're familiar with Julia Child, she goes live, but she does have that lasagna bacon in the oven. So you're about to see my lasagnas. So, and this is a mess. These aren't perfect, but this is what you can look at when you pull. This is like when I pulled like the amenity of hospital healthcare, the hospital out of QuickOSM. And I threw in some apartments and some roads, which are very dense. So I'm going to write some SQL code. I'm going to thin this out. But right off the bat, I was thinking, I wonder if certain types of neighborhoods have better access to healthcare. And, you can create distance algorithms where you can create your own matrix, your own network cost. You can look at the terrain. You can look at, anyone who lives or has visited a big city, a hospital and a home might look close, but imagine if you're in DC or you're in Manhattan, and to get to some of these hubs using public transport, you have to travel on a train to a centralized location, leave that train, and quite often go backtrack a little bit to get there. So we look at time, we look at distance. These are all things that I'm thinking about when I start looking at the data and I start pulling some of those amenities, buildings, land use, There's lots of information. It's loaded with information. You can go into that OSM and really just get lost in the different types of data. And here's another example with the hospital. I had more success when I looked under the amenity. So, it's a process. You go in, you look around, some things work, some things don't. Highways are really important too, especially if you're going to do some sort of a network calculation. But then you have to figure out what sorts of roadways are we going to consider. Are we going to look at residential? Are we looking at the motorways, the primary? And so you have to, a good thing with OSM is there's, a very vibrant data dictionary. So you know what it is you're getting. And again, if you look down here, we switch to lines and multi-strings. Here's another example. You can just do all the queries, and if you do them as points, it's a little easier when you're writing some of the code. So, each building would be a point. But if I'm going to do something very visual that I'm not particularly going to be writing, calculating some algorithms or creating a function, I will do the multi-polygon because, on a map where people are looking, it looks a lot more interesting. And, you can, like I said, you can stack these things to get, to really try to get as much refinement as possible. And in here, you don't see it, but over here, if these were temporary, you'd see a little symbol here, but these are all permanent. You can see often when I'm doing my data excavation, we'll call it anthropology, I'll take houses endpoints because I'm not sure what I'm going to want to use. And then I'll build that out here. And, here, I think this is the red, the darker the red is poverty might be. So I wanted to see if these commercial buildings, because a lot of times when and I was talking with Cliff about this, like sometimes when you use census data or you use these large data sets, everything is focused around like race. But sometimes, it's more important to look at that built infrastructure like Tobler's second law. Look in areas and see what's influencing what's inside that area. It's not look inside the area and see what's going the other direction. And things you may have heard of about impervious surfaces, asphalt, lack of greenery, this usually happens around commercial areas. And very preliminary, but I could certainly look at Los Angeles County and my eye could be drawn around clusters of commercial development. Maybe I want to know what the land's use systems are there. Maybe I want to know what the tree cover. Maybe I want to look at the flood zones, see what kind of runoff there is. I mean, there's lots of different things we can talk about and look at with these very large publicly available data sets. And here, I don't know where it went. It's too tiny. But, if you just click on the little eye for information, you can actually zero in on a place and get all this information, the total population, the total Latino population, and then, all of this data here, if it matters to you, percents, how the percents change. There's lots of, and this is scrollable. So there's lots of information that pops up just from a quick grab and go on a map. This was one I was doing when I was looking at the different districts in LA. We have all these different districts served by different, council people, et cetera. And I was looking at some of these tracts of poverty and whose districts they were located in. So you can actually, obviously do a contain thing. You can do a touch, a within. These are all SQL geospatial things that you can run directly inside of QGIS. Now here, I wanted to look at, the distance. I used apartments because, I was just trying to do it in a normal amount of time. I went back and looked at buildings too. This might be something I want to look at. I want to look at distance between supermarkets, distance, to get to a hospital, distance. I mean, you name it. It could be almost anything. And you can run OD matrix from QNeat, which is inside of QGIS, once you download the plugin. So there's another plugin at your fingertips that you can use to do matrix analysis. You can do isochrones. I know there's so many different ways to do this. This is just one that I found really simple. This is QNeat. You can see it right here. Once you download the plugin, it shows up in your processing toolbox. And this is kind of what we were talking about with network layers and cost layers and, what impacts how long it takes to get from one point to another, an origin and a destination. That could be a building to an emergency room, or, you could think deeper about different scenarios that might be more relevant for you. So, what I did, this is part of what I'm building out for the presentation I'm giving, the talk I'm having, is looking at network costs, and I want them to be less than a certain value. And this is just by looking at the shape and structure of the data. It's basically random, but then I can go, I can create a view and pull these over into QGIS and look at them on my map. I can add a layer to my map. And, I was kind of far along in my SQL writing journey before I started using aliases. And I don't know what I was thinking, that I'd never caught on this before, but when you're writing a from statement, just put a little alias there that you can remember, so that when you have to write more, code, you just need the M. And, you just need your table reference that you assigned an alias to, and you're good to go. So, and it can get quite complicated when you're joining tables. So using the alias is very helpful. This hot mess is a little bit of that matrix I was telling you about, where I was calculating, and what it does is it looks at all the distance from all the buildings to all the hospitals, right? So it creates quite a visual here. But you need to refine that a little bit. So I started refining it, and I did it in a different color. So when I'm quickly looking at these images and looking at the maps in my QGIS portfolio, I know what I'm looking at. And this is the one where I trimmed down the network cost. So it became a little more readable. And you can't see it, but the hospitals here are coded for the ones that have more people coming from further away. There's got to be a better way to say that, and these are just preliminary looks. Now, this is a map. When I looked at it, when I ran through the deck, it looks like skin or a tattoo. It's supposed to be some kind of a map. So let's just get off that. And really quickly, for the next 5 or 10 minutes, I wanted to show you, we always jump into, how do I use that tool? When, a lot of people don't know where even to find the data. And I think maybe if we knew the data was richer than we believed it to be, we could tell better stories. So you can use the census API. I use it all the time with Python. There's a whole chapter in the book about this. But you can also use Census Reporter. It's like a little cheat. Especially for the 2020 census. They created little ready-to-use data sets for cities. And of course, Los Angeles is in here because it's a major city. But really quickly, they have these race variables, but maybe we're not looking for that, right? Because what is race anyway? It's really a political construct. It's a very poor, if at all, biologic proxy. But down here, occupancy status, that's very powerful, because you can go into these neighborhoods, look at the infrastructure and see, how many of these are owner occupied, how many of these are renter occupied, how many of these are vacant. As you can tell, that gives you more of an idea of a nuance of a neighborhood than skin color or gender, right? So we can start asking bigger questions and trace back, like the autobiographicacy of the city, which is what I'm suggesting. And even within group quarters, you can see who's in college, you can see prison populations. That's very interesting. If you were going to look at paroles and prison populations and who's in these prisons, what percentage of them are getting paroled, who are the ones that are getting paroled. All of this data is readily available. Let me just click on one. Here's LA County neighborhood. These are the data files that we were just looking at, right? This is if you click on that link. But you could also go different topics. Suppose you want to study transportation. Now you see all other tables, like a B and a C table. These are going to be summary tables with lots and lots of columns and information. So this will tell you the topic, this will tell you the table. So there's a pattern to all of this, and what all this means, and where you're going to find what information is going to be within that table. And it's very easy to reassign field names in case you don't want these crazy table names in the work that you're doing, which you probably won't, because you're not going to be able to understand specifically what's going on. Let me see if there's a here. This is one I just put this. I did a study on this in the sequel book, where this was a data set we looked at about, you know, how people are getting to work. And, you know, that's just the beginning of a question. Maybe you're getting to work because there's no other options. If there's no public transport, there's no bus line, there's no this, there's that, you know, the taxi cab density is very low. These are all important questions when you want to inform a community on ways that they can be more equitable, besides saying, you know, color of skin. So you can go in here and look at all of these different topics. You can add any place you want, Boise, Idaho, whatever it is you're interested in. You can just customize this data for your use. And that's why I like Census Reporter a lot. And this is the OpenStreetMap. Remember when we went into the quick OSM, but you can also go to GeoFabrique. And this is really good. I did a big study, I think in the Python book, on the Brazilian rainforest, and I needed global data. This data is like updated like daily or some crazy frequent amount. And you can just pick your part of the world that you're interested in. So if I was going to look for LA data, I would go to North America. And then I would look at, you know, the West, you know, and I would grab this, probably a shapefile or a geospatial file, you know, but a GeoJSON. But, you know, now all this data has been condensed and it has everything in it. This is the whole kitchen sink data set that you can spill through. You don't have to look for things one thing at a time. You just keep narrowing down the region of interest, and then you'll get more curated data that you can explore. And this is a very blurry representation of the type of data. Like this right here, this is what the data sets will look like when you open up the GeoFabrique. You'll have the OSM, the land use, and then free. There's a code for whether you're going to get a polygon or a point, and you load it up and you throw it on a map, and you could really see a lot of different types of things you could see within, and these could be coded better. I just put this together when I was trying to come up with data questions that I wanted to put in my conversation, because you have residential. I usually use different colors for residential and commercial, but you can see the farmland, the grass, the forest, the parks. And I created some centroid layers here as well. And here's another catalog, Enviro Atlas is an interactive map. And, you know, you can come in here and locate lost. Look, I just wanted to find something relatively obscure, but there's a lot of environmental data in here: carbon storage, ecosystem markets, crop productivity. You can look at acres of pollinated crops with no nearby pollinator habitat, right? I mean, I'm sure, but I just thought a lot of this is really interesting. This is some of the detail that builds out bigger stories. And you also have a fact sheet with each of these layers, and, you know, the little cues here and the value, all of this really interesting information that easily can go into QGIS. And the Equity Explorer, you know, this has a lot of information in it as well: disability status, health insurance. A lot of this is ArcGIS, but I take it out and download it out and pull it into QGIS. So, I mean, it's data, you know, and sometimes it's a shapefile, which basically has spaghetti data, where the data is just kind of floating on top of a shapefile. But a lot of these can be converted to other formats that you might be more familiar or more happy about. This is this giant GeoHub, and this isn't specific to LA. Most cities, and I wish I could find that resource that I created that had all of the cities that had open data, but this GeoHub is amazing. So any city, you know, a lot of the countries, other countries, you can look at the bus routes, you can look for health, infrastructure, transportation, planning, safety. There's so much information inside, and it's such a clean download that you can pull right through your browser into QGIS. And what I do from there is when I find the data I want, then I upload it into my PostGIS, which is integrated with my QGIS, and I could just start working in QGIS, go back to PG admin, play around there. It can go back and forth, and I can write my SQL queries very cleanly in that environment. That's probably a webinar for another day. This one's great. I did want to have time to show you this. This is from the 1930s, the housing department. We didn't always have mortgages, right? The way we have them today. You used to have like 5 years to pay it off. And if not, wah, poor you. And then the housing authority, the government got involved, and they created these mortgages that people could buy. And so because they were going to be putting a risk out into the environment, they would travel to parts of these cities across the country and rate them. To tell you, well, it's higher risk, it's going to cost you more, that kind of thing. If you want more information about that, it's everywhere. I write about it. Lots of people write about it. But what's really interesting with this display, I didn't write this. This is from not even past the, gosh, I can share it with you. The link to it is very important. They do a lot of good work. I just can't think of it right off the top of my head. You can see the up here. You can just go there. But what I want to show you here is I can just go here and pick a random area in LA. And I can tell you that in 1930, this was a red zone. This was a highly vulnerable, risky, dangerous place to live. And now I can look at modern day on the right side, and you can see where it's highlighted on the right. And I find out now that these areas here are actually, their social vulnerability scores are still very high. It doesn't always go that way. Sometimes they move up to green, but these are ways, because a lot of times people think, well, that's the 1930s. That's so long ago. That's almost 100 years ago. But you know what? Those locked land use systems persist. And you can see that by going in here and just exploring and looking around it and hitting little communities and seeing, well, where are they today? Are they doing any better? Have they grown? Have they migrated? Is there anything good happening? We have some yellow here, and these all mean something different, right? Yellow is kind of caution. So red is kind of like dangerous. And then you have, approaching dangerous is, blue is like, we're still okay. And green is good. And a lot of the things they use to base this on, let me see if I put that in here. I give so many presentations on this topic. Oh, yeah. So here's this random area over here, which is D6 in Los Angeles County. And this is what it would look like in the 1930, how they described it. They're like, well, there's servants, service workers, Mexicans. Oh my gosh, it's 40% Negro. Both Mexican and Negro populations are increasing. And this is why they gave it a red. The United States government. And you can look at these historic documents all the time. And this is one of the last slides here. This is, I put this, and this is going to be in the autobiography of LA. It's a nice place to kind of start and pivot, to look at some of these neighborhoods and see what they were in 1930s, and to kind of revisit what they've become and where they are now. That was just a little taste of some of the stuff. I wanted to leave room in case there were questions or discussions. But like Cliff said, we're both going to be at PostGIS Day on I think it's in November.
November 17th.
Thank you. And this is going to be November like 16th or 15th, but this is 16th. This is really big. And this is kind of, I shared with you the behind the scenes of how I approach building out topics for talks. Day-to-day Texas. is a huge thing. It's a very big thing for O'Reilly authors too. It's a big whole portfolio, but the day-to-day is a huge, people from all over that are data experts in every field of data. I'm the GIS keynote. If you send me a message, I will send you a code back that'll save you big money on registering. My topic there is going to be based on this E.O. Wilson quote, when you've seen one ant, one bird, one tree, you've not seen them all. And it's going to talk us about, instead of creating these big buckets and saying, well, people like this and these big monolithic groups do things like that, we're going to talk granularity and specificity and try to figure out how GIS is uniquely powered to give us more actionable information. And if you want to join us on this, I'm here because I posted this, but I have a very esteemed panel of colleagues that every Wednesday at 1 p.m. New York time, we just get together on Twitter Spaces and yak it up, share topics, ask questions, all of that kind of stuff. So if you're looking for a group where you can field some questions, get some practice building a portfolio, or speaking at a mic. Maybe you want to travel around and talk about your passion topic in geospatial. We give you a microphone, and you can talk and you can share things. The only thing you have to do is have a profile with some followers on it, because as you know, there are people that like to knock on the door and be inappropriate. And just leaving it here while we do the Q&A, the book on the left is available immediately in an ebook, and soonly immediately, that's a phrase, in print. And this is the geospatial book that I think is just like a temporary thing they created just so I knew all the chapters I was sending them was going somewhere. So should I stop sharing, Cliff? So for question?
No, you can keep on sharing that so people can stare at your book titles.
As their eyes go like little zombies.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much for that. That was interesting. And everyone, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them into the Q&A, and we'll get to them as we go. I have a couple of questions that I was thinking of as we were going through this, and this sort of touches on the conversation we had before, was when we're looking at the issue of aggregating data, like especially when you're dealing with census data, does that ever present any issues for you where you really want to get more to the raw data, but all you have is this aggregated data set? How do you get over that? How do you deal with that?
Well, I mean, you can tell the highest level, lowest level of detail that you can get, right? You're not going to get below a block, so the census walks you through like how granular something is, and some data is just not available more granular even than a county. So, in those cases, it's just full transparency and you can just talk about it in that regard. There is the sort of other type of data that you can pull in if you're interested, but it just, as long as you're aware and you know how to use the data dictionaries that come with that census data, they tell you which years can be, merged, which years can't. And you can always write, if you're a writer like me and you're writing in a story, you can say, this data was from these years, this is from that, we can extrapolate with caution, those sorts of things. It's just a conversation. I mean, people, data is very biased, no matter how raw the data, how large the data set. If a human had anything to do with selecting what to choose, what not to choose, no matter the format of the data, there's bias in there. So the only thing we have at our disposal is transparency. And that's why it's very important to look at our metadata, look at our data dictionaries, or just link to them. If you're just doing, you can't teach everyone everything in the world at the same time. You can just tell them, like, for more information, here's a resource. And then, people can draw their own conclusions as to the robustness of the data.
Excellent. We have a question from Gideon. Are you able to see this?
Gideon?
It's quite a long one. Do you want to open up the Q&A, Bonnie, and you'll see it?
Let's see. Oh, huh. Well, I can talk about this because I spent 20 years as a very successful medical writer. And I used to teach people how to be medical writers. And the first thing I would teach them is you need to have your client pay to give you all of the data resources you want. All of those clinical papers, not just the ones that are freely available that you can get, you need it all. Because if we're all gathering low-hanging fruit and trying to come to conclusions, that's a problem. I don't do premium. I just made a early decision just to keep everything open source. And having done that, there may be some limits. Maybe I can't get this sort of type of data, but I would argue that sometimes the paid data is incentivized to tell a story that may not be the story that you want to tell. Does that make sense? So
I get that.
I use open data. And as you saw, I just gave you a snapshot into like a few of the data resources that I kind of cycle through when I'm building out a story to tell. There's nothing off the shelf, something I read in the news. Like I think my next one I'm going to use Puerto Rico as a study because I was listening to Minds Behind Maps, I think it was, and they were talking about using the lights at night to look at the power grids over Puerto Rico and noticing, and this is how I interpret it. I was running on a trail, very hot and tired at the time, so who knows what actually was said. But going back and seeing like power that hadn't been restored since the storm before that, and it got me very interested in that infrastructure. So I'll be building all different sorts of data sets together to kind of look, and maybe I don't have an answer for anyone ever. I'm usually the person that'll stand in front of, like when I was at NASA, I stood there, I shared the data, and I'm like, isn't that interesting? I don't judge. I don't say, y'all better get in there and start planting some trees. I'm just like, wow, here's something that is not completely subjective because I am showing you an aerial view of a satellite with raster images. You can't interfere with that, but that's a great question. Thanks, Gideon.
I have another one for you. So one of the things I like is that you're self-taught with a lot of things, and I'm the same way. I've sort of dove into a bunch
What
of
did I tell you, Cliff? I'm a consultant. You have to say I'm an autodidact. It gets me extra dollars.
Extra dollars, exactly. So what's your process? So if there's something new that you want to learn, you sort of see a presentation like, hey, that looks cool, I want to learn this. What's your process of diving into a new technology and say, okay, I'm going to now learn PostGIS inside out? How do you go about this?
I used to do it differently. I used to start, I've never been into those Udemy, those sorts of things. They've just never been my vibe. They tend to not catch up with the speed of technology. We're already 4 or 5 versions ahead by the time something is done. And I have a lot of really, really important mentors and people that I look to for these sorts of things. And you know what I noticed? And this is the beauty of Twitter for now. Could change in 10 minutes, if you know what I'm saying. But you can find somebody who, is the person, like they wrote the package, they're on GitHub. I use GitHub a lot. I trust them a lot more than like Stack Overflow or something. And I'll look for these like just little places to start. That's how I wrote the first book. I wanted to learn. I was basically working as a health policy analyst, looking at electronic data records, and I couldn't get a lot of information on location. They weren't capturing the where. And I just fell into it, and I found some data and I was able to say some things around these big clinic environments associated with hospitals and research centers. I could pretty much guess which of these clinic locations had a lot of childhood asthma. Where am I going to see a lot of heart disease? You could basically map it to the location. just because you're looking at that infrastructure and you can see the ozone levels, you can see the urban heat islands, you can see all these things that we've already proven, you know, the lights, the noise pollution, the light pollution. These are all, you know, just proven detrimental signals to health outcomes. So I forget what you asked, but that's what I that's what
I
I
asked
said.
what your
But anyway,
process
so the
is
book,
sort of-
for me was like, okay, now if I have to start from square one or square three, why didn't somebody tell me that I had to know this in the code, or why this is in the code, or how I could take the instruction manual where they show it to you, hey, look, it's right here. And then you look at the code and you're like, well, I don't know how you got from there to there.
Right.
So, you know, I started slowly figuring it all out, and that's what the book is. And that's what all my books are, because I feel like I had to figure some stuff out, and I figured it out and I wanted to share it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally makes sense. So do you find you sort of hit it until it works, or do you go through like tutorials? Is that something that you like to see a nice clean example of how it actually works, and then you go and try to break it? That's kind of how I do it.
Yeah.
Right? I'll say, oh, cool, here's a nice data set. I'm going to do it. I do 1, 2, 3, 4, it works. And then I say, okay, now let's do something a little different. And I mess with it.
All right. Well, you're spoken like a man that didn't take 2.5 years to write a book. I mean, I wrote every line of code.
Yeah.
And if it didn't work, and then, you know, the biggest thing is second go around when we were under tech review and half the stuff was broken. And I'm like, why?
There was an
And then
update.
I learned about, that's how I learned about environmental YAMLs and having to create these dependency lists and run it out of a terminal. You know, maybe some people that are computer programmers, they knew this. I learned it because I had to make the stuff work and to get from point A to point D. And
Right.
that's why I usually, like in the context, I'm talking about different people. Some people don't want to use an IDE. Some people don't know how to run code from the terminal. But I feel like you need to know a little bit of everything, because sometimes a line of code in a terminal can save you, I don't know, I'm guessing here, 3 days of writing code. So, you know, this is just my experience, and I hope it'll encourage other people to say, you know what? I think I could kind of start plucking away at something just by having this advantage or this starting point.
So let me ask you this: what do you like? You've obviously you did the deep dive into Python for geospatial. Now you've done the deep dive into SQL for geospatial. What do you like about SQL? Because that's, you know,
You're setting me up. You set me up for that because you know me. Well, first of all, let me just I have to get the background really quickly because I know we're running out of time.
That's okay. Go for it.
The Python side of it was, I decided because I was on a call and I didn't like the data that was being presented to me. I mentioned being a medical writer, and this was hematopoietic transplantation in pediatric patients. So, I mean, you know, very obscure. And I'm looking at data. I understand data in terms of reading through it, and there was a problem. And she said to me, don't worry about that. That's technical. That's for the analyst. You just write. And I'm like, if I don't know what that is, what am I writing about? And something went off in my brain, and I was like, done. So I wanted to get a quick rebrush and everything on analytics, and Columbia had this really cool executive education program on applied analytics. And it just so happens, I was an R person, but I signed up for this course and it was Python, and more Python. And I hacked through it and I got through the course. I got a 97. But on Monday, if you had asked me to write some kind of iterative function to answer a simple question, I would have been strumming my lips behind a potted plant. I wouldn't have known where to start. So I met Ted Petro, who has Dunder Data, and I took a course with him, and all these are super affordable with lots of free resources around them. This is why I'm sharing. And I finally got it. And then you got the book. And then I was telling Cliff, then I'm asked to write about SQL. And I was like, wow. They work very well together, but the Python foundation really opened up SQL for me in terms of the language that I could use to work within databases and to work with these large data sets where they actually live. Like, I don't have to bring the data onto my local computer. You know, you have a lot of freedom. And I feel like the more tools you have, like if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But because I have like Python, my R is fading as we speak, I have the SQL, I can literally just think about the best way to tackle a problem.
Yeah, no, that's great. And that's exactly how I feel about it too. Yeah, I love having different tools. So I guess here's then the last question I'll ask you is what do you think your next challenge will be? What's coming up?
Well, I've been writing, I stole the title. It was funny when I was asked to speak day to day in Texas, the autobiographicacy. This lovely, lovely woman, I don't want to share who she's just amazing, who runs this whole group. And she said, you need to patent that or whatever you do, copyright it. What do you do when you get a domain or whatever? And so I'm working on a book about a year, 1963. Autobiographicacy of a year, because we had the civil rights, we had the assassination, we had the politics, so many things we're still doing wrong today. And I want to go back and tell that story for more of a mainstream audience, if you will. So that is something, but you know, I love being able to take the technical and make it approachable and understandable. And I've been trying to do that for a lot more marginalized communities. There's not a lot of brown women. There's not a lot of people that look different that are stepping up and studying physics and computer programming and science. You know, it still has a little bit of a nerd component to it. And I'm trying to break down those barriers.
That's wonderful. Well, Bonnie, thank you very much for your time. And thanks for everybody who came to this. This is great. I will be putting this on YouTube shortly. And I guess in the meantime, you can find Bonnie on Twitter if you have any more additional questions. All right.
Thank you. That was fun. That was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thanks for your time. All right. Bye, everyone.